Today's guest on Meinl Radio is Meinl Cymbals and Meinl Stick and Brush artist Nathan Bulla. Nathan is best known for his work with Canadian prog metal outfits Intervals and Auras. Both bands provide Nathan with ample opportunity to stretch his drumming chops and explore new rhythmic possibilities. There are quite a few bands out there these days playing instrumental prog metal, but not all of them are exactly a fun time to watch live. Now, I haven't seen Auras live, so I can't attest to their show, but I have seen Intervals, and I can say that their show is especially captivating to take in. Rather than sit back only in support of some serious guitar heroics, Nathan's drumming provides an exciting foundation that proves equal to the challenge of keeping up with all of the insanely great playing that comes from the stage. When Nathan first came to Meinl, he and I had been chatting about it for a while. Then one day at NAMM, which by the way is absolutely the worst place to try and secure an endorsement deal, Nathan casually walked up to the Meinl booth to say hello and to put a face to the name. Well, he and I hit it off so well that we decided right then and there to begin working together. Now don't get me wrong, don't let this be your cue to start coming to NAMM to try and get deals with the companies of your choice. My point here is to say that in what's usually the worst place to try and nail down an endorsement deal, Nathan was able to, and that's really saying something about Nathan as a dude. He's just a great guy. Couple that with being a great drummer, and it's pretty much a no-brainer to work together. Speaking of working together, we recently had Nathan come to Nashville to do video shoots for Meinl Cymbals and for Meinl Stick and Brush. His level of preparation was off the charts. Couple that with being one of the most laid-back cats around, and well, Nathan made it so easy to get the job done. We decided while he was here in Nashville to get this podcast going as soon as he returned back to Canada, so here we are. Enjoy the podcast. I would like to welcome everybody into the Meinl Radio podcast. Today we've got probably one of the nicest dudes you'll ever meet and one of the fiercest drummers you'll ever hear, Nathan Bulla. Nathan, thanks so much for being on the show, man.
Oh man, that was way too kind. You gotta lower the bar a bit to start.
Come on, dude. Like the nice part, you just come by it sort of like through your national DNA, being Canadian. It's like, I'm nice.
Yeah, I wear that on my sleeve for sure. It's not something I try to hide.
Where does that come from? Like, why are all Canadians just inherently really happy people? I mean, you guys live in snow like 8 months out of the year.
I think it's because we're against the elements together. You know, like we're constantly like plowing each other's driveways and like, you know, just kind of looking out for just the fact that it can be rough, you know, for like half the year here. So not so much where I am, I guess, but I'm in the southern tip of Ontario, so it's a little bit more mild most of the time, but yeah, we do get some heavy hitting time. So I feel like people are just a little bit more banded together in that sense, you know?
Remember when you were down here a couple of weeks ago and you were like, dude, this weather, it's so perfect because it was still pretty
yeah.
warm?
Beautiful.
Right now, it's still 80 degrees Fahrenheit outside.
No, you know what? It's only like maybe as low as 70, 68 right now here. So like
wow.
We're catching on to a tail end like heat wave, I think. So, I mean, I'm not a big fan of global warming, but I'll take the perks, I guess, for now.
Yeah, it's nice to get the heat while you can.
Yeah, no kidding.
Man, I've got a bunch of stuff I wanted to talk to you about, just kind of randomly in no particular order, and I hope I'm not going to hit on the same questions that most people do in their podcasts, so if I do, just bear with me.
Yeah, you got it.
So one of, if not your first name gigs, was with Canadian singer and guitarist Kim Mitchell. So from my U.S. point of reference, I had to do a little research. I mean, I'd heard the name for years, but I had to do some research to see how far back this went. From my U.S. reference point, his only charting U.S. single was Go for Soda, and that was way back in 1984. So all of that being said, working with Kim was, in essence, working with a musician who was much older than you. How was that experience in terms of the age difference and relating musically with such a gap between musical points of reference, or was it just a case of come in, play the songs, and leave?
I mean, a bit of both, like more so the latter, I feel, because I was really just filling in for the guy that was like on the gig at the time. This guy, Chris Sutherland, who's like kind of a local legend around here, does a lot of theater stuff. And he just got really busy actually with an American band called the Roadhammers. And he was going to be out on the road with them. So he just kind of asked me to sub in on some gigs. And yeah, I think the gap was more like visual. I kind of grew up on some of his stuff and just some classic music from that, 70s and 80s kind of era, via my dad for sure. And it's sort of, to me, it didn't feel super weird. I don't know if it felt weird to them that I would think I was 24 on that gig, and Kim was probably 61, 62. So, but I played like random gigs with all kinds of musicians my whole life. My first thing when I was a kid, I was like 11 playing in a concert band with like 60, 70-year-old people. So to me, it's sort of just like, musicians, I guess. But to them, it was probably a little bit like, is this child going to be able to, to like, there's a lot of dudes as well that like legends, Paul DeLong and stuff like that played on his record. So he's really known for having incredible drummers behind him. So it was nerve-wracking, but I don't know if the age thing really ended up being as jarring as it seemed, maybe to some of the audience. But yeah, I was about half the age or less than most of the guys or everyone on stage, as far as I remember.
And did you say visually is probably where, like, to people looking in the audience, it was probably where it was sort of like an obvious difference?
Yeah, there's some kid, in like a cutoff shirt, just kind of like rocking out back there. I don't know, like I was a little bit sort of anticipating that he would want me to like look a certain way or do stuff a certain way, but that was not the case. He was just like, do what you want, just kill it, and plow and let's go. And so yeah, I got to really be as comfortable as I could be, which I think helped a lot as well. But it probably just caused a few people to ask some questions in the audience. I got some people backstage like being like, who are you? Like, where did you come from?
Yeah,
how old
for
are
sure.
you?
Well, I'm curious. So a guy like that who has been around as long as he has, now he's got his recordings from the actual albums from the recording studio, but then he's been playing these songs live for so many years. So after a while, people will have sort of what it's morphed into, like a live version. And did he have you learn live versions or strictly album versions?
It was a little bit of both. More so the live aspect. They did have some videos for me from some recent like festivals and things like that they did, just to mainly get me to know what songs they hang on certain spots to play a solo or crowd involvement and things like that. But yeah, they're pretty true to form for the most part, and I think it's just because of the loyalty of those fans, and like most of those people are never listening to the live version of his stuff. They're hearing him on the radio from that original record, right? So, swaying too far, I think, would be a little bit of a detriment to just the experience for the crowd, just because of who he is and kind of how long of a career he's had. But there was some little bits here and there, some fun quirks, and I don't know, it was just more focusing on, I think it was a bit of such a blur for me because it was so quick and short-lived, and I just had to cram it all in a short amount of time and no rehearsal and all that stuff. So I didn't really think about any of this stuff before you brought it up. So a little introspective now,
Yeah, well, don't go quiet on me. So with that gig, was that your first sort of big gig, I should say, as far as like working with an established career professional, or you said 24, so maybe you had been doing stuff already prior to that?
Yeah, that probably still to this day stands as the most sort of like recognizable artist that I played for as far as the average kind of person. And definitely the most mature. Like, those dudes are legendary musicians. I learned a lot about how to be sort of more of a mature player as opposed to like, the kid that I kind of grew up being, like loving Travis Barker and like pop punk and all that stuff, which I kind of were a bit of my roots growing up. And it just helped me kind of learn a little bit more of the importance of dynamics and just fundamental note placement, things like that, things you don't think about too much, or I didn't think about too much, I guess, before then. But yeah, that was a huge thing for me as far as like gigs go, definitely the biggest one up to that point, and I feel like still.
Speaking of pop punk, we talked about this when you were here in Nashville recently about that's kind of what you grew up cutting your teeth on. I was listening to an album a couple of days ago on the way home from the mountains in a road trip. I've turned my daughter onto Jimmy Eat World. She totally loves Jimmy Eat World.
Nice.
And I have this theory that Jimmy Eat World was a crazy huge influence on Taylor Swift, and which is sort of validated because I have seen her bring the singer guitar player from Jimmy Eat World out to do the song "The Middle" during one of her shows.
Okay, nice.
But she has that kind of voice warble thing that he does, and there's just certain melodies she'll play. Anyway, point being, I'm really getting off subject. My point is that drummer from Jimmy Eat World, couldn't tell you his name. I think it's like Zach or something.
Yeah, what's his last name?
I can't think of it, but he's really creative and good.
Yeah.
And so pop punk is pretty much known for having all this just straight driving 2/4 kind of stuff. But there was a lot of creativity. For your money, who were the really deep pop punk drummers that maybe didn't get the recognition that they deserved? I mean, everybody says Travis Barker because he was kind of like the pinnacle of it all. But there were dudes back then that were playing cool stuff. Like, who's someone I should know about if I don't already?
I don't know, like the thing is I don't think I was focused so much on the drummers in those bands that I was listening to back then as much as I was just the music and the the band in general. But there was a lot of bands like The Starting Line, Cartel. I'm trying to think of like, this is going a little far back, but Stellar Cart, some other bands that I just was into, and I never really knew the drummers, but they were always drawn. Like I think I was drawn to it because of their interesting, motifs and little themes and stuff like that you'd hear throughout songs that didn't necessarily need it, but benefited from that added sort of percussive element. But Brandon from The Used was a big one as well when I was younger. That guy was just a really interesting. He always had interesting phrases and things that were a little bit out of the ordinary, and I think I was always gravitated towards the less than standard style of playing, even though I would kind of stick to writing my own parts in a fairly standard way. But yeah, like, I mean, Travis was kind of the guy. He was just the go-to.
Well, for good reason. I mean, the guy was really great. And it's interesting, too, because I found out years after he'd been on the scene that one of his biggest influences, at least I think I'm right about this, but I'd read that one of his pretty big influences was Mickey D, the drummer who came up in King Diamond.
Yeah, you were talking about Mickey actually a couple weeks ago.
I'm sure I was. I'm such an
the Tom
idiot.
Phil.
Like, oh, dude, I'm such an idiot. Like, just complete meathead when it comes to metal. But yeah, I love it. So yeah, Mickey D, because he was really tight, played really weird, cool stuff. So like, interestingly enough, Travis Barker and both Vinnie Paul from Pantera they said that Mickey D, he was a huge influence on each of them. So
right, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, real tight drummers who write cool parts.
Yeah, and parts that sort of like make the section of the song either evolve or just be more interesting,
Yeah, and it wouldn't be that song without that part.
Exactly. No, for sure. That's what I think was so interesting about a guy like Travis, because there's no, you can't replace it with a different part and be like, yeah, this is, it feels right and it's recognizable in the same way, Some stuff more so, I guess, but he was super unique.
Yeah, for sure. And while I'm talking to a Canadian, I'm going to have to tell you that's exactly what I love about one of your fellow Canadians, Neil Peart. So everybody talks about Rush and Neil Peart's crazy fills and all of this technical stuff, but I always felt like the thing about Neil that was cool is exactly what we're talking about with Travis Barker, Mickey D, or Vinnie Paul, is that the song wouldn't have been the song without that one thing he played the exact same way every time in just the right part. He would just place it exactly where it needed to be.
Yeah, I honestly think there was a lot of subconscious influence that he had on me as in exactly that respect, where keeping things consistent and matching melodies with rhythms and things like that in the structure of a song, that can be such a powerful tool as far as making the song feel more, I guess, together, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word, but cohesive and just kind of everyone's actually working together. And he was literally a mechanical machine. Like he could just reproduce things in such a consistent way that was obviously a very just an inspiring thing. Kind of seeing, those old videos of him playing in Rio and stuff. I remember the DVD of Rush in Rio and him just ripping that solo for like 15 minutes. So
it's funny to hear you say that. Now, would that have been like your first sort of Rush visual experience? Would have been seeing those DVDs of them in Rio?
Yeah, I think that was kind of around the time that I was choosing to listen to stuff on my own, and watch, drummers and just get into that. Another one was the Queen at Wembley in 92, or it was right before Freddie passed, and it was there's a section on the DVD that was drum cam only, or anyone cam really, but there was 4 different songs, or if I'm remembering correctly, 4 different songs of different angles of just Roger Taylor for the whole song. And that's literally where I learned to spin a drumstick in my hand. Because I saw him do it all the time, and I was like, oh, I can see it closely from this angle, and I can watch it from this angle and kind of dissect what he's doing and sit there and practice and piss my mom off dropping sticks everywhere in the living room,
Yeah.
But that was a big one too.
You just made me think that back when MTV was actually a thing and when it first started, and they were really hurting for videos because they just didn't have a ton of content yet, they would take live, it would be like a live show, say Rush's Exit Stage Left show that they had filmed, and they would take a song from that show and that would be a video. And so the first time I ever saw Rush, saw them, was I was, a kid, and I was watching MTV, and so Tom Sawyer or whatever would come on, and it was from whatever year that concert was, 82 or something like that. And that's good stuff.
Yeah, just a machine, and for hours too. Like the other thing about those shows is that I saw Rush once. They played for 3 solid hours. It was kind of nuts. It was really it was just surprising that they were still so energetic at the end. And I understand the adrenaline factor, but man, I've been on stage for an hour, and by the end of the hour, I'm just get me into an ice bath or something. Let me cool off. I'm just, I'm dying.
Yeah.
But respect to those guys, especially at, 50, 60 years old, Jesus.
I know.
I hope I'm doing that.
Yeah. I tend to think it's if you don't quit, if you consistently play music, that it'll help keep you younger. So
yeah,
I think it kind of feeds itself in a positive way.
Yeah. I mean, it's also just the routine of things in general. I think humans are just inherently like that, where keep the routine going, and it's no sweat to keep it going. But as soon as you take a lull for a long enough period of time, that's actually one of the things I'm almost worried about right now, going back on the road in a month from now, because it's been the longest period of my life without being on the road since I was 18. And at the same time, I'm also obviously the oldest I've ever been, but in my 30s, and kind of just thinking about it as a keeping the train rolling way beforehand. I've been trying to keep my stamina and everything up for the past even few months, more than I ever would when I'm off the road. So that stuff's actually been on my mind lately as well.
Well, I was going to ask you this question much later in the podcast, but I'll fast forward to this question now because you just said something that brought it up.
Just bouncing
with all the
around.
Time, we'll do that. Now, with all the time that you've had at home during the COVID, I guess I'll say lockdowns plural for you, Canadian. You guys had more than one lockdown, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Multiple.
Right. So you've had some time at home. What did you actually gain from it, musically speaking?
Well, I really dove into my studio stuff, building up my studio more and just being more proficient and really just knowledgeable about what different microphones do and preamps, things like that. Just kind of getting more familiar with my gear. And because of that, I think it resulted in me being inspired to play more, because I've set up a monitor mix that I've never really had at my disposal, other than being on the road with the in-ear kind of rig that we have going on with like, reverbs and all that stuff baked in and everything's running real time. I have that now at my place. So, like I'm just more inspired to like solo the room mics and like feel like a Bonham-esque sound, and then like I can kind of mess around with the sounds a little bit more and get inspiration out of that. So I find that I've been playing and exploring stuff a lot more than usual, improvising and trying to create more awareness of what I'm doing and things like that. So it's been like, one of those, like, that's just a silver lining, all the downtime, to be able to really just to focus on being a better drummer, as opposed to like being better at the music that I'm playing on the road, per se. And that's always, it's hard to pull up. It's been hard to pull focus away from that the past like 10 years or so, because that's been the majority of my time, right? So it's been nice in a way to just jam by myself.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you said about being able to dial in your monitor mix and using that as inspiration, because normally you think about that from a guitar player's point of view. Maybe they get a new pedal that's a new delay pedal or a new reverb setting, and so suddenly they get this new sound that they can mess around with, and now all of a sudden it provides tons of inspiration. Drummers, I guess you don't ever really think that about, because it's like, okay, I've got my drum kit, it sounds like this.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah, but with what you're doing, that's really cool. Suddenly you're not in like a small little room anymore. Suddenly you're in a giant hall or whatever.
Yeah, it's also, I'm lucky I have a room upstairs above my drums that's completely empty. I've actually kept every soft surface out of there to make sure it's really washy, and I just like, I'll jack those mics and just kind of like let it surround the close mics, or I'll just turn the close mics off and just feel like I'm standing in a different room even though I'm playing. And I feel like it's kind of my version of, just as far as practicing and stuff like that, my version of what you see like guys like Eric and Proda doing, or Dan Mayo, with like the pedals in their system and they're miking up drums as opposed to using electronic pads. They're, using actual acoustic drums, but using augmentation of those sounds. And I feel like it's inevitable that I'll get into that world at some point. I'll need more guitar pedals to get that going, but it's it's a similar sort of thing where being able to manipulate the sounds can really kind of breed certain feelings and certain emotions, and make you kind of play certain things that you otherwise wouldn't. Same with different kits, right? That's my first foray into this, was getting just a different kit that was completely different configuration and stuff, and that helps, but it only, dry drums are dry drums. So like you can only go so far with that.
How did you get into recording?
Demoing, really. Demoing in a lot of, like, I worked at a music store a long time ago, and the drum section was right beside the recording section. So, over the course of a few months, I was kind of just always hanging out with the guy sitting in that section who's the recording guy, and just kind of going, how do you record, 8 separate inputs? Or, I didn't really understand how you couldn't get from a regular analog mixer into a computer with multi-tracks and all that stuff. So it just kind of started then. And then when I started playing with the guys in my band Auras, it was a lot of drum programming and learning how to demo stuff so that we could hear multiple options, and so I could hear certain parts tons and tons of times before I actually had to learn it, so that it was way easier to internalize. And then just going from there, you kind of, once you catch the bug, like, it's an expensive bug, and I already play drums, which is not the cheapest instrument in the world, but it's like one of those things that kind of, I always thought about it would be ideal if I could record my own sessions, and now I can, and I'm actually like really, really loving the results, like as far as comparison to other studios I played in. Obviously rooms are rooms, but as far as like close micing a drum kit, I feel like I'm at least comfortable enough to be doing. I did a bunch of sessions the past couple of years, or the past year and a half. So it's been it's partially a work thing, but partially an inspiration thing, just because I'm liking it. It's fun, nerdy.
Well, yeah, I mean, dude, it's funny. Nerd used to be a bad thing when I was a kid, and nowadays I'm like, nowadays I don't want to know anybody who's not a nerd about something.
Yeah, well, because they're boring. Let's be
Right.
honest.
Yeah. Well, now that you've mentioned it, it kind of makes me realize that there are quite a few artists on our roster who are pretty savvy when it comes to recording. Like it's almost one of those necessities these days that you have that working knowledge of. And so I guess I wonder, from your point of view, is it odd now when you meet drummers who aren't savvy about that at all?
That's funny. It kind of is now that you mention it. Not really necessarily, because I understand. Like, one of the things that I was always saying when I first started playing to people, like guitar players and stuff, I was always like, "Well, I don't have to worry about cables. That's great." And I'm not in that mess. I'm not in an electronic world. When the power goes out, nothing changes for me. Had that mentality, and then so you kind of have to embrace the fact that you're gonna have to learn about how computers work, even in the basic sense, just to troubleshoot things. And it's a journey the whole way. But I'm not surprised that some people are not as inclined to really dive into it. And like I said, it's expensive. So drums are already expensive, and if you're a drummer, it almost makes less sense to be doing this kind of thing if you're if you're always buying new sticks and skins and cymbals and all that stuff, right? So things add up, and I'm not that surprised, but I'm also not surprised when there's lots of drummers who do this, because it's kind of a drumming brain, or at least a musician brain, where you're solving little problems and kind of just taking it layer by layer,
Yeah, for sure. Well, a question I've got for you that kind of gets away from what we've just been talking about. You're mainly known for two bands that you work with fairly consistently, Auras and Intervals. Now, are you a stakeholder in Auras versus Intervals, where Aaron Marshall, and for those of you that don't know, Aaron's the guitarist and band leader of Intervals, where he's the one ultimately calling the shots? So now, just so I know, in Auras, is it kind of a democracy thing, or is there basically one dude in charge?
Yeah, no, you nailed it. It's like there's four of us in Auras, and we all kind of share the brunt of things. We all kind of delegate tasks and whatnot. Put your aces in their places, as they say, and that's kind of our mantra. But yeah, with Intervals, it's more of like a hired musician sort of thing. But just because of the nature of the business and how it's independent, and it kind of creates more of a sort of business structure as opposed to a band structure. It's a little bit of a different thing, but I think it's a comfortable spot for, at least for most of us. I don't know. I can't really speak for the other guys that play in the group, but I mean, I love the fact that it's my band, but it's not really my band. So I don't, if it gets sketched, then I have a way out. It's one of those things where it's like, it would be a little bit, I think, emotionally daunting to be fully invested in more than just one or two things. So, and I have other people that I play with and stuff. So I always had this sort of session musician mentality, and this is kind of just a nice full-time contract, you can kind of call it, in a sense,
Yeah.
I don't think they're getting rid of me.
This would be an interesting thing to explain to anybody out there listening who's not been put into this situation yet. Let's say there's some people listening who, at this point, they're learning their instrument, they're spending time in the practice room, they've not yet really gone out there and gone into playing with other musicians into that world. So what would be the pros and the cons of each situation? Being in a band where you're if there's four members, you're one quarter stakeholder, and then being in a hired gun situation, what would you tell this person? Like, here's what's cool about this, and here's what sucks about this, and here's what's cool about this, and here's what sucks about this.
I think it's just mainly gauging your responsibilities. Like, either the responsibilities that you feel like you could take on, or maybe you have time for. Because when you're in a band setting, like, everyone's kind of got to do their part in certain ways, like, whether that's, spending time on certain things, or doing the, really everything. The more I think about it, I'm like about to list off 20 things, and it's kind of pointless. But when you're in the sort of, I guess, hired position in a sense, then obviously your responsibilities are really just that are already usually clarified with you beforehand. that correlate to your rate of pay or whatever is coming your way. So I think it's more a matter of kind of just knowing what you either can be responsible for or what you want to be sort of on the hook for as well, what you feel like you can contribute, but also what you can, and you can always contribute more if you're in a less responsible, like I do a lot of stuff with intervals that's not, it kind of feels like it's, bandmate stuff, but it's just because it's all for the good of the business in general. So when the business is healthy, you're healthy, you're happy, and that's just kind of how it flows,
Yeah, for sure. I would say if the musical integrity of the situation is good, say like with intervals or any situation, then part of a benefit of the hired gun thing might just be that it's just that. You can just literally turn your brain off at a certain point and go home and not have to stay at the store.
That's exactly it, yeah. There's some solace in that, There's some comfort with that knowledge at the end of the day. And there are some sticky decisions that have to get made, and I often am sort of thinking in that moment, like, oh, I'm kind of grateful I don't have to worry about dealing with that or, dealing with the lawyers or dealing with the travel agent and just all this little nitty-gritty stuff, which I know a lot of it's management-oriented as well, but because of the nature of this band in particular, it's the independence and all that. It's kind of just a tandem between Aaron and the manager, Rich, who's kind of oversees most of the things that go on. So it's easier to be someone that just gets kind of told what to do and, has to do your job as well as you can do it. Like, put your aces in their places again.
Yeah.
But yeah, So whereas you have to delegate that with the people and sort of create with the people in your band and sort of create a, democracy, like you said, or like you're like your own political system, right? So that can be challenging for sure, depending on the people involved.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to totally do a 180 here to something else that I know is a big passion of yours. When you were also, we had a lot of conversation when you were here in Nashville, and one thing that you mentioned to me was that you're fascinated with teaching drums. And I want to know, what was your first teaching experience?
You know what? I feel like there was always a little bit of a general, like, team teaching thing going on when I was in high school. So when I was in high school, I met a couple buddies that were also drummers. One of them is actually like a really, really successful like trumpet player right now, which is funny. Turns out he's good at lots of instruments. But the other drummer, this guy Rich DeSilva, he actually plays for a country artist in Canada, Jess Moskaluk, and some bunch of other artists. He's a pretty in-demand dude. I randomly happened to go to high school with him, and it was a really strong sort of bond between people that were in different sides of things. He was a Carter Beauforty kind of open-handed dude, and I was like Travis Barker, as we discussed earlier. And just the camaraderie with them, when there were other people that were kind of like, oh, show me a beat or whatever, it would be all of us kind of in tandem trying to kind of help this person figure out how to play simple rock beat or something. And then one day someone just hit me up and they were like, I think I was 16 or 17. They're like, can you just show me some stuff? And then it kind of just snowballed. Like it wasn't very long before I was like, this is actually a really fulfilling thing for me. And it makes me think about the craft in a more sort of big picture way, right? Like it lets you step back a little bit because you're showing or watching someone else do something and you're thinking, how do I approach this myself? And whether that's a conscious thought or just a subconscious realization, it sort of seeps into your playing. So I always find that it's like, if I'm not going to be practicing or playing, if I'm teaching, it's another side of that sort of, that snowball effect that just makes the entire craft that much more manageable for me.
Mm. Well, as far as your influences as teachers go, I've heard some people I know who are teachers, they've told me that their influences are actually other teachers and not necessarily just a drummer that they grew up listening to.
Right.
So do you have any direct influences that were teachers per se?
Well, I am in a family that kind of has a bunch of teachers. Like my aunt was a teacher. She just retired recently. Both my grandparents were teachers, and my grandmother actually taught at the school for the deaf. So there was just always that kind of like, oh, and my other grandfather actually taught culinary school in Toronto, and they actually named the restaurant at the school after him at George Brown. So he was a bit of a legend in that scene, and I kind of always had that, he would teach me things and someone else would teach me something else, and just the art of learning, or the act of learning, I guess, was always, fascinating because of the, just the emotion that teachers that care about what they're talking about have when they show you stuff. And I was always kind of, I realized that I felt that with drums. So I think it kind of came from my family in that sense. But also drum teachers. Like my drum teacher was a big influence in that sense because he was just thorough and understanding, and, it was just it felt like it was in line with everything else that I'd kind of learned my whole life. So yeah, I don't know. It's not really maybe the most thorough answer, but definitely family, I would say a little bit, as well as, early drum teachers and clinicians as well. People
I think it's a more interesting answer than probably what I was expecting. I was figuring you would maybe list, well, this guy, I used to read his articles and the way he looked at things inspired me. But the fact that you come from a family of teachers, I think actually validates even more what you do as far as having students, because you come by the trade honestly. It's pretty much in your DNA. So that's, for anybody out there who's thinking of taking lessons with Mr. Nathan Bulla, just know that he comes from a family of teachers.
I should put that in my ads, like when I do that whole thing, which doesn't happen as often as it should, honestly.
That's funny. I got to ask, what's the hardest part about teaching drums?
Sometimes it's like just redundancy and patience. Like, I feel, I'm not going to ever sit here and be like, I'm a really accomplished and very I'm all over exactly what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing all the times. I have no idea most of the time what's how to kind of go about solving the problem until it's literally in front of you and you're like, oh, this person is having a problem with it's their foot that keeps doing this, or this one note in this section or whatever. And I think trying to kind of just analyze that stuff on the spot without feeling like you're wasting their time is something, at least it's on my mind all the time. Like, I gotta make sure I'm giving them value because I'm charging, this and this. And you think about that stuff on your mind. And I think removing yourself from that TikTok mentality, or not like the app, but the clock is ticking mentality. Mm-hmm. And think more about, okay, take a deep breath, slow down, try to analyze what you're doing, maybe even take a step back. That's usually what I find the hardest part, is making that judgment myself and being like, okay, don't keep pushing this person, lay back a bit, or maybe even focus on something else that relates but isn't as, challenging or something. Mm. It's a very open thing.
Yeah, for sure. I could totally see that. And so sometimes, often, I guess, you don't really know what you're going to say until the problem is presented right in front of you. And so I would have to wonder if now suddenly the teacher is also the student. And that's not to say the student is the teacher, but maybe the lesson is the teacher for both. And so you may come to the answer a lot faster than that student would. In fact, you'd probably come to it right there in the middle of the lesson. But I guess what I'm wondering is, in an overall arc of being a drum teacher thus far, what has been one of the biggest lessons that you have learned from teaching drums? Or maybe not even lesson I learned how to put this bass drum here. I mean, what's just been one of your biggest takeaways from it?
That's a great question. I would say, it kind of edges back to what I was just saying before, but the patience thing, I think I've become more just able to be patient at the right moments. And I feel like I'm still, I still fight against it, or fight sort of the desire to just talk more or try to do more and tack more stuff on it. But letting things breathe a little bit more probably, because then, like I said before, how I've been practicing a lot in the past year or so, year and a half. It kind of was always on my mind, being like just the act of being patient while I was getting into things. So I think it's sort of like it's a mental thing. It's like more of a creating space for that, like, evolution of whatever you're doing, like whether or not you're working on dynamics or coordination or whatever it is, but just allowing yourself to kind of be in that mental state and focus, I think is really helped a lot by just trying to be patient with certain things. So now, instead of learning something, a month before and trying to do it every couple days, I'll just start way earlier, but way less like rigorously. Like I'll just be chill about it and just kind of dick around. And then, at some point kind of be like, oh, I'm already feeling like I'm getting into things a little bit more. And at that point, realizing that my patience has already paid off to a point where now I can tackle it with more ease and focus on some more how related things, how am I playing and how do I feel when this happens, etc.
Yeah, that's great. That makes total sense. Getting away
There's a lot
from
going on in drums, man. There's a lot going on, so it's like hard to turn your brain off sometimes,
But on a lot of levels too. It's physical and it's mental and it's whatever you want to call it, spiritual or soulful or there's so many levels to connect with, and if you have a good teacher, that teacher will help you connect with all of them.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like I never understood how there's some people out there who like a crappy martial arts teacher. Like, how the heck did that guy get in that position, or gal or whatever, get in that position in the first place, being an asshole? Like, aren't martial arts supposed to make you more zen and peaceful? And it's kind of the same thing with music. I mean, it's like, dude, you play drums. Like, be cool. And so I would say that with all those levels, it would take pretty much a very even-keeled, cool person like yourself to cultivate the patience and be able to connect with people. And it's not just as simple as, hey, Venmo me $100 and we'll get on for an hour and, I'll talk about myself and we'll look at you do a paradiddle and then we'll call it.
Yeah, that never feels right to me, that kind of thing. I mean, you can also learn it, I think, like learn the patience and all that. But yeah, it definitely helps if you're at least putting yourself in check that way and trying to just monitor that.
Yeah. Dude, I've heard some horror stories. I mean, like for some online lessons, I've heard, not online as in people who have actual websites, but just like some pros.
The one-on-ones, yeah.
The one-on-ones.
No, yeah.
Oh, dude, and I will name zero names.
No, of course.
I'm sure you've heard some of the same horror stories.
Yeah, nor will I.
Oh, God. It's just like horror stories. It's like, I hope you don't see that guy at NAMM, because if you do and you punched him in the face, I think you'd be well within your rights.
Well, if I'm not the one that's getting ruined by that guy, then I don't really care.
Exactly.
Not that I don't care, but,
Yeah,
I got no skin in that game.
Right. Totally different from teachers, but I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I need you to explain the differences between Canadian drummers and drummers from the rest of the world. Is there anything that makes Canadian drummers uniquely Canadian as far as being a drummer?
Maple syrup. Oh, sorry. I thought that was a trick question.
That's like the default answer.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know, man. Like it is weird too, because like you could bring the Australians into it, you could bring the Europeans into it, or even section off the areas of Europe, and I think there's just such a surgence of I will say the Canadian sort of grant system, or like the ability to be able to get some support and some funding for certain things, like depending on what you're doing and all that stuff. I think that sort of at least motivates people to be maybe more focused on it. But again, I'm flat out guessing. I feel like it's just a bit of an influence from that. But I mean, we got some hitters up here, eh? Like we got some dudes that really, really rip. So it's it's been fascinating to watch the scene grow a little bit, over the years.
That's interesting. The grant system. So you guys have a governmental grant for the arts that enables you to participate and learn, correct?
Yeah, there's sort of different layers of it. I think there might be, I'm assuming there's a federal one as well, but usually it's provincially sort of dispersed and all that. And also there's some private companies. I think there's like a couple. I'm not super knowledgeable about how that whole system works, but I've definitely, been the beneficiary of some of that as well over the years from just support of certain tours or certain albums and things like that, and how that can really, especially for independent niche music artists, like playing progressive metal and like instrumental rock, like it's, not a lot of people are going to give you the time of day when you're sort of pitching that. So it's definitely a very fortunate plus side of being in this country, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
Where do you see yourself 10 years from now?
Probably in the same position, just continuing to evolve what that position is. Like, just recording out of my basement unless I have a different spot in 10 years, maybe shared spot with some other people or something, maybe need a bigger room at some point. But for now, I mean, what I have is more than enough, and I could see it lasting 10 years. So that's definitely a possibility. I'm hoping I'm, ripping the same stuff and able to play, Auras tours and intervals tours and continue to play the music and do it justice. Like, I feel like it'll be an interesting day when I have to kind of make a decision, but I don't really foresee that happening anytime soon. So there's just a lot going on in the music. So I feel like trying to just continue to improve my relaxation and my sort of, without sacrificing, important things like dynamics and all that stuff. And I think I don't know, 10 years from now it's very possible it's the exact same thing. It's also very possible that I'm in an indie band, or I moved to like Amsterdam or something, who knows?
Why Amsterdam?
Well, I like Netherlands a lot. I like Haarlem a lot. Like, when we spent some time there, we went to the Aristides Guitar Factory, and the first time we went over there on tour. And so, like, ever since then, I've kind of just enjoyed that country in general. It's just been interesting. But hopefully it's there in 10 years. Let's all cross our fingers for this.
Yeah.
Not
Dude,
to make it dark,
You should have thrown us all for a loop when I asked what you were going to do in 10 years. You should have said something like, with a straight face, just, I hope to open an elderly daycare center. Something like that. Just, everybody's like, what?
I mean, my sister studied gerontology, so that wouldn't even be way out of whack,
Really?
Go into business with my sister, why not?
Dude, that's fascinating. From what I understand, it's very hard. The field of gerontology is declining, which is odd considering.
And it should be growing, yeah.
Right. I guess it's because there's technically not a lot of money in it at the moment, like supposedly.
Yeah.
Compared to like other fields in the medical profession, but anyway.
Of course, yeah.
How the heck? Oh, it was because me being an idiot. That's how we got onto that subject.
Yeah, there's the tangent, eh?
Yeah, always with me.
Beauty.
So I'd like to let everybody know that we just did a video session here in Nashville with Nathan, and we did, what did we do, 4 tracks? Is that what we did? We did 4 or 5?
That's correct. 4 songs.
We did 4 songs, all of them interval songs, correct?
Yeah. That's the stuff that I've been having to brush up on because of the pending tour that's looming at this point.
Right. And so this pending tour that's looming, when is that happening?
It starts November 8th or 19th in Detroit, and we're doing the loop around the States. And currently it's slated to end in Toronto on December the 18th. But we'll see what goes on with it. I think we're starting rehearsals in a couple weeks from now. We're doing a way more extended version of rehearsals than we've ever done because we got to, meet each other again. Remember what we all look like,
Well, that sounds like fun, actually. Man, Nathan, thanks so much for being on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Looking forward to the next time we get to hang out.
Dude, it's going to be a great time. I mean, we're going to be in Nashville on December the 10th, which is right before my next birthday. So maybe I will see you then, depending if you're around.
Actually, you know what? I'm looking right now, I'm flipping through my calendar, and I don't see it there, so I'm writing it down right now.
Love it. Love it. I know Brandon knows about it, so might have a couple of the Meinl fam there.
Awesome.
I love that, dude.
Of course, Brandon's the best.
Yeah.
All right, so Nathan, Nashville, I've got it. Dude, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Meinl Radio. If you liked what you've heard, please remember to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Give us a rating as well on Apple Podcasts, if that's what you're listening to this on. Also, go to meinlcymbals.com, or go to meinlstickandbrush.com, or go to both of them, and sign up for our email newsletters to keep up with everything that's going on in our Meinl world. Thanks. Take care.